Good morning. Welcome back to the shop and part two of lowering my 68 Mustang. So as you can see, I took the springs outside. Now I took them outside because of course I didn't want to get, metal shavings everywhere. And as you know, this stuff gets airborne and I don't want to get it on my car. So it was a beautiful day yesterday. I took the springs outside and I cut 1/2 inch off of the driver's side and 5/8 of an inch off of the passenger side. And then, of course, once I was done there, I took them back into the shop. I measured them on the table, and we were perfect. Both springs are exactly the same height. So I took them and I put them back in the car. I dropped the car back on the ground. And so today we're going to take a look and see what we've done. So again, as I mentioned before, I have a flat bar that goes on top of the tire. We make sure that the bar is now level. So we're level off the top of the tire. We take our measuring tape and drop it here. And what you're going to see is that we've only dropped 1/2 of an inch. So why did we only drop 1/2 an inch after taking 1/2 an inch out of the coils? Let's go back to the bench. So why did the results not turn out the way I had expected, right? Basically, because we took 1/2 of an inch out of the coil, the actual height of the coil, I had expected the upper A arm to swing up because it would swing up that 1/2 inch, which of course would translate into a 1-inch drop at the wheel. Why didn't we get that? Well, actually, it turns out there's a number of reasons why we didn't get that, and let's cover those now. So before we get started, I'd like to thank all of my subscribers. This has been a great journey. It's been over 18 months, and over that time, I've done a lot of things I've never done before, and I really didn't know how, and I've received a lot of feedback. In this case, this is something I've never done before, and I received some great feedback as to why the car didn't drop like it's supposed to have. So before I get started, I'd like to thank Out of Gas Garage. I'd like to thank SobTech and Don Thompson for providing a bunch of information that I think everybody should know if they're thinking of dropping the car. So let's start with the easy stuff. Number one, brand new suspension. So everything on this car is brand new. Uppers, lowers, ball joints, all the bushings, everything is brand new, squeaky tight. Number one, the car is not going to behave when you have a suspension that is brand new until it's broken in. Number two, the sway bars. The sway bars are designed to keep the tires level, and here I am trying to cut them different lengths with a sway bar connected. Well, of course, the sway bar is going to fight everything I'm doing. Number three is that the shocks are brand new. Now, these are gas pressurized shocks. So although normally they are designed to dampen, they actually still do exert pressure because they are pressurized. So another problem is that I could be getting pressure from the shocks lifting this car up. Another one is the sheer weight of the car. This car has not been completed. I don't have all of the front end on this car yet. I don't have the roof on the car. There are no seats in the car. So until I get this car loaded, I really shouldn't be trying to refine the ride height of the car. And then, of course, finally, the fenders themselves. I didn't verify that the distance of the fender height, the opening from the top of the fender to the inner lip of the fender, was the same on both sides. Now, these are not original fenders, right? They were replaced at some time. If they were replaced and they're aftermarket, we all know aftermarket parts are terrible. So I could have been working under an assumption that the distance between the top of my fender and this distance was the same on both sides. If it wasn't, and thank goodness it is, but if it wasn't, then I would be chasing a gap that I could never fix. Luckily enough, both fenders are the same. So that's the good news. Now, if those weren't enough reasons, there are two more reasons that are even worse. Number one, the spring. When you cut that coil out of the spring, you'll notice the spring is actually flat here. It's not a circle. That tail is designed to slip into the upper A-arm's pocket, and that's where that tail sits. And then, of course, the spring sits up on top of that. When you cut the tail off, that perch is not designed to be a circle. It actually is designed
to have that tail. So the new spring doesn't sit properly into that perch because the spring is now round at the bottom. It doesn't have that offshoot, so it actually binds a little bit. So the spring's not sitting in the bottom perch. Number two, the spring itself has now been rotated 180 degrees. And the reason is because we took half a coil out of that spring. So that spring now needs to rotate in order to get that new cut part aligned with the perch where this part used to be in. That 180 degree rotation of the spring has changed the dynamic of the spring. The spring used to sit for 50 years between the upper A-arm and the shock tower, and it actually had a natural curve to it because we're working with an angle, right? We're working on a pivot point, and it's trying to do this. So what ended up happening is by rotating the spring 180 degrees, I've actually changed the spring rate, and it's going to need to relax. The last thing is that at the top of the spring, there is actually a plastic cap. Now that plastic cap was designed because when you get to the top of the spring, they actually have to shave the spring so you get a flat surface, but it's actually not flat because the spring has some thickness. So they put a piece of plastic there to try to make that flat. That piece of plastic is actually keyed. Up in the shock tower, there is a receiver, and that receiver is actually shaped like the letter D. It has a round side but a flat side. That is supposed to key into the spring. Well, I've rotated the spring 180 degrees. That plastic no longer sits in the D. Now it is plastic, so of course it moved as soon as I put the springs in because of the weight. But the fact is that that plastic now is holding the car as well, and it also needs to rest. So basically, we need to put this car back together. We've got to put all of the weight back into it. So we have to put on all of the front parts. We have to put bumpers and everything's in the roof and the seats before you even think of trying to adjust ride height. So was I premature? Yes. Okay, so enough of what I did wrong. So what did we do right? Well, the good news is by adjusting the springs the way we did, we absolutely did level out the car and measure out both sides of the car. We now have a 1 1/2 inch gap between the driver's side and the fender and the passenger side and the fender. So we've eliminated that 1/4 inch. I now checked the rears. The rears are actually within like a 1/16 of an inch, and I know I'm getting nitpicky, especially on suspension, but the fact is I just wanted to make sure that what we're doing is actually having an effect. So we have leveled the car. I don't intend to be taking anything off of the springs anymore. We're going to wait for this to settle. And once it settles at whatever height that settles at, we'll then adjust the back to make sure it matches the front, because that's what you want, right? You want a visual. You want to be able to see the same gap around the car all the way around. And that's all it is. It's more of a visual, in the stance of the car. So we're going to leave it. So let's get back to reassembling this car. So let's get the front end on this car. Let's get all the bumpers and lights and everything installed. We'll get those fenders cut and polished. We'll start putting the roof on and get the weight of the roof on this car before we even think of the rear suspension, because that's a lot of weight going on the rear. And then we're going to get this car back together. And then we're not going to do anything with the ride height until I get a couple 100 miles on it, and then we can start adjusting it. But that's it for this video, because in all honesty, I can't do anything more until this car is able to drive on the road. And although I'll have it probably ready in the next month to do that, I certainly can't take it out until probably March or April, before the roads are clear and all the salt is off of them. And, I don't want to take the car out in crap. But basically, we're probably not going to be able to do the final suspension until March. I'm okay with this. We were a little jumping at the gun, but at least now we understand exactly where we're at, and we'll just leave it the way it is and let this thing settle in. Until the next time, hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, hit that like button, and I'll see you in a couple of days when we have the front end bolted onto this car.